There are moments in Earth's history that feel so strange, so foreign, that if you didn't know better, you'd swear they belong to the pages of science fiction. Yet they happen etched into the rocks beneath our feet, written into the very coal that fuels our modern world. One such moment came over 300 million years ago. In the Carboniferous period, when Earth transformed into something that would feel utterly alien to us today, imagine walking into a world where the air itself was intoxicating, oxygen or life-giving. Breath was not 21% as it is now, but a staggering 35%. Every inhale would hit you like a rush of champagne, leaving you lightheaded and euphoric, as if the planet itself were drugging you. The very air could betray you. A single candle would burn twice as fast, its flame an eager, ravenous tongue. Lightning, when it struck, would not just ignite dry brush, but could set entire rain-drenched forests ablaze. Unstoppable infernos roaring through landscapes that were supposed to be too wet to burn. And then there were the creatures. Insects that defied belief, swollen by chemistry into monsters. Dragonflies, as wide as your outstretched arms, patrolled the skies like living kites. Millipedes longer than sofas crawled across the forest floor with an armored inevitability. The size of house cats lurked in the shadows. These were not freak accidents or one-off oddities. They were the natural result of an atmosphere so hypercharged with oxygen that life itself seemed to inflate. This is the world of the Carboniferous. A place where forests stretched endlessly, where swamps bred both coal and fire, and where evolution was experimenting on a grand, reckless scale. To step into this chapter of Earth's story is to step into a time that cannot, will not, ever happen again, because the chemistry that created it, the delicate imbalance between carbon and oxygen, was a singular accident, a one-time evolutionary loophole, and yet that loophole lasted not for centuries, not for millennia, but for 60 million years. Long enough to leave behind forests that hardened into the coal seams we mine today, at long enough to give rise to titanic arthropods that still haunt our imaginations, long enough to shape the trajectory of all life that followed. But to understand how this alien world came to be, we must begin not with the monsters, but with the air itself, with an accident of evolution that flooded the skies with too much oxygen, and with a planet assembling itself into one vast supercontinent that would become the stage for this extraordinary drama, 300 million years ago. The face of Earth looked nothing like the familiar globe we see today. The continents, those drifting puzzle pieces of stone, were still in motion, grinding together with the slow patience of plate tectonics. Instead of being scattered, they were gathering, assembling into something titanic, a single landmass that stretched nearly from pole to pole. This was Pangaea, the greatest supercontinent in Earth's history. Surrounded by a vast global ocean known as Panthalassa, the land was young, raw, and restless. Volcanic ridges smoldered, mountain chains clawed, skyward as continental plates collided. And across these humid lowlands and swampy basins, life was just beginning to stake its claim. Imagine the air heavy with moisture, a world that pulsed with heat and rainfall. Rivers meandered through endless wetlands, feeding shallow seas and low-lying marshes. It was here in this damp crucible that Earth's first true rainforests unfurled. But these were not forests as we know them. If you were to walk through one, you might not recognize them as forests at all. Towering above you were lycopsids, the club mosses, rising to heights of 100 feet taller than a 10-story building. Yet they weren't true trees. Their trunks were hollow, filled with water, their leaves mere scales along columnar stems. They reproduced not with seeds, but with spores that drifted through the humid air like microscopic dust storms. Among them stood colossal horsetails, relatives of the small reed-like plants that still grow today along riversides. These were no delicate weeds. They were giants, thick as telephone poles, their ribbed stalks forming vast green scaffolds. Seed ferns spread broad fronds over the canopy, primitive but imposing. And then there were the fungi-eating, tree-sized organisms like prototaxites, some stretching over 20 feet high, their forms more alien than any plant. It was a world without flowers, without fruit, without grass. No bees buzzed, no birds sang. The sweet scents and colors of modern forests had not yet been invented. Instead, the Carboniferous forests were dark, damp, and primeval, a tangle of shadows and spore clouds. The air was thick with decay, every step sinking into mats of rotting vegetation that would one day compress into coal. Yet for all their strangeness, these forests represented something new in the history of life. For the first time, the land itself was cloaked in vast, continuous greenery. Photosynthesis was no longer the work of scattered mosses or shallow algae. Bedzit had scaled up to a planetary phenomenon, and with it, the chemistry of the atmosphere began to shift in dangerous, unimaginable ways, because these forests were not just scenery, they were engines. Their towering stalks and endless mats of leaves sucked in carbon dioxide and breathed out oxygen in volumes the planet had never seen before. What began as swamps became laboratories, testing grounds where the very air itself was remade. The continents were gathering, the forests were rising, and the stage was set. The Carboniferous was about to give birth not just to a new kind of landscape, but to a new kind of world, one in which the balance between air, land, and life would tip into the extraordinary. Asterisk beneath the dense canopy of opsids and ferns. The forest floor was a different kind of wilderness. This was not the crisp crunch of leaves you'd find in an autumn wood today, but a wet, spongy underworld. Every step sank into mats of rotting vegetation, roots tangled with mud, and pools of stagnant water. Decay was everywhere, but it was incomplete. The plants of the Carboniferous had evolved lignin, a tough and complex compound that gave their stems rigidity, allowing them to grow tall. But in this ancient age, nothing yet existed to fully break lignin down. Microbes tried and failed, fungi gnawed but could not finish the job. Instead, when plants died, their remains piled up in vast waterlogged bogs. Slowly, layer upon layer of this carbon-rich detritus was buried beneath swamps and sediments, compressed by the weight of time. Those bogs became peat. The peat became coal. Millions of years later, humans would dig into these seams of black stone, unlocking the fossilized sunlight of the Carboniferous to fuel our own industrial revolution. The very word Carboniferous means coal-bearing, a reminder that this ancient swamp world still powers our cities today, but the formation of coal was only half the story. It's all that carbon was being locked away underground. Something else was happening above. Plants, through photosynthesis, exhaled oxygen. Normally, much of that oxygen would be reabsorbed as microbes decomposed dead wood, balancing the cycle. But with lignin-resisting decay, the balance broke. Carbon was buried, oxygen accumulated. Slowly, invisibly, the air grew richer, more dangerous. Geologists and paleobiologists estimate that oxygen levels may have peaked as high as 35%, nearly half again more than today's 21%. That doesn't sound like much until you realize what it meant in practice. Inhaling would leave you dizzy, euphoric, almost intoxicated. Fires would rage uncontrollably, igniting even damp wood and wet soil. Small sparks became conflagrations. Even the act of breathing carried risk oxygen toxicity that modern divers know well would have been an everyday danger. And yet, for much of life, this oxygen saturation was a gift. For the sprawling jungles, it fueled explosive growth. 4. Amphibians crawling onto land, it made primitive lungs more efficient. But most of all, it rewrote the rules for arthropods, creatures with hard exoskeletons and no lungs. Creatures that breathed passively through spiracles and tiny branching tubes. In today's thinner air, they are captain size. They're in the Carboniferous. The cap was lifted. The result was an arms race of scale, insects. Millipedes and arachnids ballooned to sizes that would be impossible now. It was as though the atmosphere itself had become a kind of steroid, inflating their bodies to monstrous dimensions. This was the gift of the swamps. Oxygen as abundance, oxygen as fuel, coal beneath, fire above. The very chemistry of the Carboniferous. World was unstable, yet it held for tens of millions of years. Long enough to produce a biosphere that feels more like myth than history. And at the heart of this story lies a question. How exactly did these creatures grow so large? The answer is hidden not in their bones, but in their breath. To understand the monsters of the Carboniferous, you must first understand their lungs, or rather, their lack of them. Insects, spiders, millipedes, scorpions, none of them breathe the way we do. There are no rib cages rising and falling, no lungs inflating, no diaphragm pulling air into chambers. Instead, they rely on a delicate, alien system that seems almost too simple to sustain life. Their bodies are lined with spherical tiny holes in their exoskeletons. Little gates that open to the outside world. From each spiracle runs a branching network of trachea, microscopic tubes that snake deeper and deeper into their tissues, splitting into smaller and smaller filaments until oxygen is delivered directly to individual cells. There is no blood ferrying oxygen around, no hemoglobin-binding molecules of air. Oxygen simply diffuses, drifting inward like a mist. Following the laws of chemistry, it's elegant in its simplicity, but fatally flawed when it comes to size. Diffusion works only across short distances. Larger the animal, the harder it is for oxygen to reach the cells at the center of its body. In today's atmosphere, 1% oxygen. This system puts a hard ceiling on how large an insect can grow. No matter how much food it consumes, no matter how well-armored its exoskeleton, the physics of gas exchange pins it down. That's why the largest insect alive today is the hefty New Zealand giant WT, measures only a few inches long and weighs about as much as a mouse. Impressive to hold, perhaps unsettling to encounter, but a far cry from the dragonflies of the Carboniferous with wingspans longer than your forearm. But 300 million years ago, with oxygen saturating the air at levels 50% higher than today, the rules changed. Suddenly, diffusion could work over longer distances. Oxygen penetrated deeper, saturating tissues that would normally suffocate. The invisible barrier that kept insects small was lifted. It wasn't just speculation. 2007, scientists at Arizona State University tested the theory. They raised insects under different oxygen concentrations, creating miniature versions of ancient atmospheres inside sealed chambers. The results were stunning. Beetles grew bulkier, dragonflies developed larger wings. Even the humble fruit fly showed changes in size depending on the oxygen it breathed. The genetic potential for gigantism still lingers in these species, is the air that restrains them. This is why the Carboniferous gave us dragonflies the size of hawks, millipedes, longer than men, and scorpions you could hear moving through the underbrush. It was not magic, it was math. The air itself had become a partner in evolution, inflating creatures that today seem impossible. But what did it feel like to live in such a world? To walk among plants that were not quite trees, and insects that were not quite birds. Air that made your head spin while all around you, the very atmosphere fueled life to monstrous proportions. To answer that, we must take a step deeper into the jungle itself and see the Carboniferous not from a textbook, but from the ground. Asterisk, close your eyes and imagine stepping into the Carboniferous forest. The first thing you notice is the air. It feels heavier than any breath you've taken before. Humid, dense, almost syrupy, thick with moisture and oxygen. Every inhale makes you lightheaded, a dizzy euphoria that borders on intoxication. Even the sound of your own breathing feels amplified, as though the atmosphere is pressing against your chest. Your boots sink into the ground. Beneath you is not soil as we know it, but peat, a black spongy mat of decaying vegetation that squelches. Underfoot, roots curl across the forest floor, like veins beneath translucent skin, disappearing into pools of stagnant water where moss and fungi thrive. The air smells of rot and greenery, an endless churn of life into death and back again. All around, shadows stir. Small arthropods scuttle across the wet litter, antennae twitching. Primitive amphibians, their skins slick with moisture, slip between reeds and vanish into black water with barely a ripple. This is no quiet paradise. It is a world alive with movement, each patch of darkness hiding something that crawls, clicks, or writhes. And yet, the true spectacle is not on the ground, but above. The canopy stretches 100 feet overhead. Formed by lycopsid trunks that rise like pillars into the mist, the light filtering through is dim, fractured, greenish. It feels like standing in a cathedral built by plants, damp and eternal. For a moment, you wonder how anything could thrive in such gloom. Then a flutter breaks the silence. A shadow passes overhead, broad, angular, and strangely graceful. You tilt your head back, and your mind struggles to reconcile what you're seeing. At first, it resembles a bird, but birds won't appear for another 100 million years. Instead, this creature belongs to an earlier experiment in flight, Polyodictyopter. Their wings stretch up to 2 feet across, veined like stained glass windows, patterns catching stray shafts of sunlight like spider silk. They are some of the earliest flyers in history, older than dragonflies, older than butterflies. With their 6 wing-like lobes for true wings and 2 small prothoracic winglets, they seem designed by an evolution, still testing its blueprints. Gentle gliders, they sip sap from plants through long, proboscis-like mouthparts, drifting between treetops in silence. They are not predators. They are wanderers, drifting relics of evolutionary experimentation, proof that flight had arrived. For the first time in Earth's history, an animal had left behind crawling and swimming to master the air. And it is an astonishing sight. The world has opened a new dimension. The forest itself seems to hold its breath, as though aware of what this means. The air has become a battlefield as well as a highway. And while Polyodictyopter may be peaceful, others soon will not be. Because in this oxygen-rich world, the skies will not remain gentle for long. Hunters are coming, predators with wings sharper, faster, and deadlier than anything that had ever existed before. Asterisk, the silence of the Carboniferous canopy does not last long. A low vibration stirs the air, a flicker of movement, and suddenly, the shadows above resolve into something immense. Looks at first like an oversized dragonfly. But as it sweeps closer, you realize it is something far more ancient, far more terrifying. This is Meganeura, ruler of the skies. A predator that reigned for millions of years with no rival to challenge it. Its wings stretch, nearly 30 inches across, longer than the arm of a grown human. Each one beats independently, a double pair of sails working in perfect counterpoint. Unlike the clumsy flutter of moths or the rigid thrust of birds, Meganeura's 4 wings pivot and rotate with precision, granting it complete command of the air. It can hover like a hummingbird, bank sharply through the tangled canopy, or dive in a blur of motion. Its head is dominated by 2 compound eyes, massive globes that catch the light like polished stone. Each eye is a mosaic of thousands of lenses, providing a nearly 360-degree panorama of its world. To its prey, there is no escape. Every movement, every twitch of a wing or ripple of water falls into its sight, and when Meganeura chooses to strike, it does so with near-perfect accuracy. Fossil evidence and biomechanical models suggest a success rate over 90%, revel few predators in Earth's history have ever matched. Its barbed legs, bristling with spines, form a basket in midair, a cage that snaps shut around prey before it even realizes it has been targeted. Smaller insects vanish in an instant. Juvenile amphibians clambering too far from their pools may be lifted skyward, thrashing helplessly. There are even suggestions that early reptiles, still fragile and slow, might have fallen victim to these airborne assassins, but Meganeura was not born a master of the skies. Like its modern dragonfly descendants, it likely began life in water. Fossil clues hint at aquatic nymphs with gills and ambush tactics, hiding in the shallows of carboniferous ponds. These young were predators too, feasting on tadpoles and small crustaceans, waiting years before molting into their final winged form. When at last they emerged, they rose not just from water to land, but from land to sky, an evolutionary leap as dramatic as any in history. Discovered first in 1880 in France, the fossils of Meganeura revealed wing venation so complex, so finely engineered that scientists marveled at the architecture of its flight. Nothing in the modern insect world matches its size. Nothing would until birds arrived more than 100 million years later. For tens of millions of years, this insect ruled without contest. In the Carboniferous canopy, it was death with wings. Swift, efficient, and almost untouchable. The skies had opened and the first great predator had claimed them, but while Meganeura dominated above, the forest floor below was alive with terrors of its own creatures that crawled, stalked, and stung in the shadows where the canopy's light could not reach. One of them, armored and venomous, would grow to a size that still chills the imagination. If the skies of the Carboniferous belonged to Meganeura, then the shadows beneath the canopy belonged to something older, heavier, and infinitely more patient. Imagine crouching beneath a fallen club moss trunk, the air damp and heavy, when you hear the faint scrape of armor sliding against itself. Then you see it, a shape that should not exist at such a size, moving deliberately across the spongy ground. This is Pulmonoscorpius carctinensis, the giant scorpion, nearly 30 inches from claw to stinger. It was the size of a house cat, but armored like a knight in obsidian plate. Each step was measured, its segmented legs pressing silently into the peat, its pincers flexing with unnerving precision. This was no frantic insect. This was an apex predator, deliberate and confident. Because in its world, there were few who could challenge it. Its massive pedipalps, the front claws were not just grasping tools, they were weapons. Fossils suggest serrated ridges along their inner edges, perfect for holding and crushing prey. Once trapped, there was little chance of escape. Then came the sting. Arched high above its body, the tail curved forward with frightening speed. Though no fossilized venom glands survive, all evidence points to a deadly payload. Modern scorpions carry it. There is no reason to believe their giant ancestor lacked it. A single sting could fell amphibians, arthropods, perhaps even early reptiles. Its vision was both simple and sophisticated. Two larger eyes likely provided depth perception, while smaller, lateral eyes scattered across its carapace detected even the faintest flicker of movement. Add to this the sensory hairstrick obothria that could pick up air vibrations, and you have an ambush hunter built to sense its prey long before it ever saw it. But Pulmonoscorpius did not chase. It waited, concealed beneath fern litter pressed. Against the damp trunks of lycopsids, it became part of the shadows. When prey wandered close, it struck with sudden violence, claws snapping shut, tail plunging down, venom delivered. It was the patience of this hunter that made it terrifying, a predator that blended perfectly into the dim underworld of the Carboniferous forest. Fossil remains found in Kirkton Quarry, Scotland, confirm its reign. There, in what was once a swampy wetland, its armored body left impressions in stone that tell us it thrived in these damp, cluttered habitats. And for a time, it was unrivaled, a master of stealth and poison today. The largest living scorpions barely reach 8 inches. Even the mighty emperor scorpion is a fraction of its extinct cousin. Yet for a brief span of prehistory, Pulmonoscorpius prowled the ancient swamps like a nightmare made real, a creature that seemed ripped from human instinctual fears long before humans even existed. But the forest floor held something even stranger. Because where Pulmonoscorpius was a predator of shadows, another creature was simply impossible in scale. A millipede so vast, it blurred the line between insect and landscape. Asterisk, at first glance it looks like a fallen log, half buried in peat, its dark plates glistening in the damp light. But then it moves. Slowly, deliberately, the log bends around a tree trunk. Dozens of legs rippling in sequence, carrying its segmented body forward. What you are seeing is Arthroplura, the largest land invertebrate to have ever lived, stretching up to 8.5 feet in length. Arthroplura was no mere bug. It was a living tank, armored in overlapping dorsal plates that locked together like the shingles of a roof. Its body undulated as hundreds of legs pushed it across the swamp floor, a wave of movement that stirred the peat beneath it. Imagine a creature as long as a man is tall, but far heavier, pressing its bulk through the undergrowth. And yet, for all its monstrous size, Arthroplura was not a predator. Fossil evidence suggests its jaw structure lacked the piercing or slicing features of a hunter. Instead, it was a detritivore, a decomposer. It fed on rotting vegetation, soft plant matter, and perhaps fungi. It was a cleaner of the Carboniferous world, turning the endless litter of fallen leaves and decayed fronds into mulch. 3K WAYS-broad. Rippling impressions preserved in stone confirm its presence across ancient Europe and North America. Some are so deep and wide that you could lie down inside them. These fossilized paths speak of a creature too heavy to be challenged, too massive to be ignored. Predators like Pulmonoscorpius may have stalked the shadows, but even they would have thought twice before attacking this armored juggernaut in a world defined by scale. Arthropluera's size was its greatest weapon. No vertebrate of the Carboniferous could hope to overpower it. Even its slow, deliberate gait was a kind of protection. Why hurry when nothing can touch you? And yet, mysteries remain. No complete head of Arthropleura has ever been found. We don't know exactly how its mouth worked, or whether it cared for its eggs, or how it reproduced. It remains partly a puzzle. A shadow left in stone rather than a complete portrait. Still, what we do know is enough to stagger the imagination. A millipede, larger than a man, crawling through primeval swamps, its armored body glinting as it fed on a forest that itself was alien to us. And if Arthropleura was an herbivorous titan, their Carboniferous arthropods carried a more deceptive terror. Some looked like oversized spider's butt appearances, as we will see, can be misleading. Asterisk for decades. Textbooks and museum displays told a chilling story. The Carboniferous swamps were home to the largest spider that ever lived.
You're out of
Megarock. Fossils seem to show a body as wide as a dinner plate, armored and alien, with limbs sprawled out like a nightmare caught in stone. It was described as an ancient predator, lurking in shadows, waiting for prey to stumble within reach of its fangs. The very name Agorkan giant spider was enough to send shivers down the spine. It became a staple of prehistoric documentaries, an icon of terror from an age already brimming with monstrous insects. But then, in 2005, a closer look changed everything. A team led by paleontologist Dr. Paul Selden re-examined the fossil with modern imaging techniques. What they found was startling. The creature wasn't a spider at all. It wasn't even an arachnid. Instead, it belonged to an entirely different lineage, the Eurypterids, or sea scorpions. Megarocken had never spun webs or stalked the forest floor. Instead, it lived in freshwater rivers and swamps, squat limbs sweeping through silt to trap worms, insect larvae, and small crustaceans. It was an aquatic hunter, not a land predator, cousin of horseshoe crabs and marine scorpions rather, than tarantulas. Its body, preserved in fine detail, bore the resemblance of a spider only superficially. The segmentation, the armored plates, the paddle-like limbs, all marked it as a Eurypterid. At about 20 inches long, it was still a formidable creature, but no longer the giant arachnid of nightmares. And yet, the correction makes the story no less fascinating. Eurypterids were an ancient and diverse group, once dominating oceans before fish and amphibians rose to prominence. Megarock represents one of their last great experiments in adaptation to freshwater, a reminder that the Carboniferous was not only about life on land, but also about the strange ecosystems evolving in rivers and swamps. It is a humbling reminder of science itself, that our understanding of the past is always provisional, subject to revision as new evidence and better tools emerge. What we imagine as terrifying monsters may turn out to be something altogether different, but no less extraordinary. Still, the Carboniferous did harbor true arachnid predators, ones that really did creep through the shadows. They weren't as large as Megarocken was once imagined to be, but in their own way, they were among the first true hunters of land. Before spiders ever spun their first webs, another kind of arachnid ruled the undergrowth. They were called Tregonatarbids, and in many ways they looked like spiders. 8 legs, segmented bodies, armored carapaces. For over a century, they were mistaken for true spiders. But in truth, They belong to an older, now vanished lineage, one of the first groups of predators to live entirely on land. Fossils show that Trigonotarbids appeared as early as 419 million years ago, predating the Carboniferous. By the time the coal swamps spread across Pangaea, they had already adapted perfectly to a terrestrial existence. Unlike their aquatic ancestors, they breathed air through book lungs, just as modern scorpions and spiders do. They were among the pioneers of air-breathing life. But unlike spiders, Trigonotarbids had no silk, no webs, no traps. Their survival depended on stealth and speed. Their bodies were low and armored, their legs lined with tiny spines for gripping leaf litter and navigating the cluttered forest floor. Their prey were small, soft-bodied invertebrate surly insects, worm-like creatures, anything slow enough to be overpowered. Their jaws, called chelicerae, were sharp enough to pierce and crush. Once seized, prey was pulled in close by those spined legs, held fast while the Trigonatarbid fed. At just a few millimeters to 2 inches in length, they were not giants. But their strength lay in numbers and adaptability. In a world of towering plants and monstrous arthropods, these small predators thrived in niches others ignored. What makes them remarkable is the preservation of their anatomy. Fossils from sites like the Rhynie Chert in Scotland capture them, in astonishing details down to their respiratory organs, their mouth parts, even the fine hairs on their limbs. It is as though time itself paused, leaving behind a snapshot of creatures that quietly dominated their world for tens of millions of years, and yet they vanished. Not in a cataclysm, not by fire or flood, but by being outcompeted. As true spiders emerged armed with silk and new hunting strategies, the Trigonotarbids slowly faded. No final predator ended their reign. It simply became obsolete. Still, for a time, they were the lords of stealth in the Carboniferous forests, the first predators to truly belong to the land, creeping through the shadows while giants thundered above them. But not all creatures of this ancient world relied on speed or venom. Some carried with them a fortress, a living suit of armor that seemed impossibly advanced for its time. Asterisk, long before scorpions ruled the swamp floor or dragonflies conquered the skies. There lived a creature so small you could hold it on your fingertip, so heavily armored it earned the nickname the Excalibur worm. Its real name was Lepidicculus, and it swam the shallow seas of the Devonian and early Carboniferous, tens of millions of years before the great swamps reached. Their peak at first glance, Lepidicculus looked like nothing more than a tiny, flattened worm. But under closer inspection, it revealed something astonishing. A full suit of armor composed of overlapping mineralized plates, each made of crystalline calcite. Layer by layer, these scales interlocked like medieval chainmail, forming a flexible exoskeleton far more sophisticated than anything else its size. When threatened, it could curl into a ball, exposing only its armored exterior. To any predator, its size primitive fish, crustaceans, even other wormsit, was nearly impenetrable. Evolution had forged a miniature fortress, a worm clad in stone. It was this uncanny perfection that inspired its mythic nickname, as though some ancient craftsman had forged it with the precision of a blade fit for legend. And yet armor has its price. While Lepidicculus was safe from attack, it was slow. Its movements were hindered by its heavy plating. It could defend itself, but it could not outrun or outcompete swifter creatures. Over time, that trade-off became fatal. Evolution rewards balance, not extremes, and eventually this lineage faded into obscurity. Still, its fossil record offers a haunting glimpse into the creativity of evolution. At a time when most animals were soft-bodied and vulnerable, Lepidicculus carried with it a fortress, strategy that made it almost invulnerable. It was not a giant like Arthroplura, nor a terror like Pulmonoscorpius, but it represents another truth of the Carboniferous world. This was an age of experimentation. Evolution was not yet finished shaping the rules of life on land and in water. Creatures tried forms that seemed bizarre to US six-wings, armor-plated worms, insects bigger than birds before natural selection made its choices. And as we return to the swamps themselves, we see how all these experiments hinged on a single factor: the breath of life. oxygen, which made such extremes possible. But as the Carboniferous went on, that same breath would begin to thin and the world of giants would slowly unravel. Asterisk, every living thing in the Carboniferous was bound by a single, invisible law, the chemistry of the air. To understand why dragonflies grew to the size of hawks and millipedes stretched longer than a man, we must look at how these creatures breathed. Insects and their kin did not have lungs like us. They had no diaphragm, no pumping system to circulate air. Instead, their bodies were laced with a branching network of tubes called trachea. These tubes opened to the outside through small holes, spiracles, along their exoskeleton. Oxygen drifted in through these openings and diffused passively to the cells that needed it. It is a simple system. It's elegant in its efficiency, but it has a limitation. Diffusion only works over short distances. The larger the body, the harder it is for oxygen to reach the center before being consumed. In today's atmosphere, with its 21% oxygen, this places a strict cap on insect size. That's why the largest insects alive today, like New Zealand's giant WT, still fit easily in a human hand. But the Carboniferous was different. With oxygen at 30 to 35%, the rules changed. Suddenly, diffusion could reach much farther. Oxygen was so abundant that even massive bodies could be supplied without pumps or blood vessels. It was as if evolution had been handed a temporary cheat code, and insects responded by growing to sizes that today seem impossible. The link is not just theory. In 2007, researchers raised modern insects in chambers with elevated oxygen. Grew larger, beetles bulked up, and cockroaches expanded beyond their normal limits. The genetic potential for gigantism remains buried within them. It simply cannot be expressed in the thin air of our present world. This hyperoxic atmosphere also gave insects their legendary strength. Even today, pound for pound, insects are the strongest animals on Earth. A dung beetle can haul over 1,000 times its own weight. Ants can carry many times their body mass. Now imagine that strength scaled up to the size of a small dog. In the Carboniferous, such creatures were real. Their exoskeletons and muscles were built for leverage and raw force, and the air gave them the breath to sustain it. But oxygen is both a gift and a curse. With so much in the air, even damp wood could ignite. Forest fires swept the swamps with terrifying frequency, a natural check against oxygen climbing even higher. In a sense, fire itself became part of the planet's balancing act, preventing the air from becoming unbreathable. And when the oxygen began to fall, the giants began to vanish. Arthropods that had thrived in abundance shrank, some disappearing. Altogether, their breathing system, once an advantage, became a prison. Meanwhile, vertebrates with their lungs and circulatory systems were just beginning to learn how to exploit the changing air. The stage was set for one of the great turnovers. In Earth's history, the giants of chitin and armor would fade, and new creatures would inherit the swamps and skies. For 60 million years, the Carboniferous world had thrived on abundance, endless swamps, towering lycopsids, oxygen-rich skies. But by 305 million years ago, change began to stir slow, relentless, and irreversible. The continents once scattered were colliding. Pangea, the great supercontinent, was closing together, and with its rise came upheaval. Mountain ranges grew where flat swamps had once stretched. Winds shifted. Rains that had fallen in endless cycles grew more erratic. The great humid basins began to dry. The rainforests fragmented. Where once there had been unbroken expanses of fern and club moss, there were now isolated patches, islands of green surrounded by drier ground. The peat bog shrank. Its fires, once frequent but recoverable, now burned through forests that did not return. The very engines that had pumped oxygen into the atmosphere were faltering. As the forests collapsed, oxygen fell from its dizzying peak. Of 35%, the concentration began its long decline. 25%, then lower still. Enough for humans had we been there, but not enough to sustain the physiology of giants. Insects that had once sprawled across the canopy shrank within a few million years. Arthropods that had depended on abundance dwindled or vanished. This event is now called the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. It was not an asteroid or a volcanic cataclysm. It was slower, subtler, a change in climate and chemistry that reshaped ecosystems piece by piece. Amphibians, once dominant, suffered heavily. Their moist skins and water-bound eggs tied them to habitats that were disappearing. In their place rose something new: reptiles. The reptiles brought with them a key innovation: the amniotic egg. Unlike amphibians, they could lay eggs on dry ground, their scaly skin locked in moisture. Their lungs and circulatory systems were more efficient. As the swamps broke apart, reptiles spread into the drier lands, claiming spaces amphibians and arthropods could not follow. By the end of the Carboniferous, the age of giant arthropods was over. They had not been destroyed in a single moment of violence, but squeezed out by a slow tightening of the world itself. Oxygen fell, forests thinned, and their reign simply ebbed away. Yet, even as the chitin-armored titans faded, their decline paved the way for new dynasties. From the drying forests and shifting climates emerged the small, hardy reptiles who would one day give rise to the dinosaurs, the birds, and the mammals, including us. The Carboniferous had shown what oxygen abundance could create. The Permian, which followed, would show what resilience and adaptability could endure. Asterisk, the Carboniferous forests seemed eternal vast cathedrals of lycopsids, tree ferns and horsetails stretching into the mist. But hidden within their very structure lay the secret of their own undoing. That secret was lignin. Lignin is the complex polymer that gives wood its rigidity, the reason trees can grow tall without collapsing. When plants first evolved it, they gained a revolutionary advantage: height. Millions of years, no organism could break lignin down. When a tree died, much of its wood did not rot. Instead, it sank into waterlogged peat, sealing away its carbon and leaving its oxygen in the air. This one-way traffic of carbon into the ground and oxygen into the sky is what drove the atmosphere to 35% oxygen, fueling the reign of the arthropod giants. But evolution is never one-sided. Around the end of the Carboniferous, something remarkable appeared: fungi that could digest lignin. These white trot fungi had evolved enzymes capable of dismantling the tough polymer. For the first time in Earth's history, the fortress of wood could be broken apart. When these fungi arrived, the cycle shifted. Now when a tree fell, its carbon returned to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Oxygen stopped accumulating. The great imbalance ended. This innovation reshaped Earth's chemistry forever. Never again would oxygen rise so high, because never again would forests lock away so much carbon untouched. The fungal breakthrough was as important as the rise of photosynthesis billions of years earlier. Life had altered the atmosphere once more, not by adding oxygen, but by capping it. Evidence of this transformation survives in the fossil record. Charcoal layers, once abundant from Carboniferous fires, diminish in younger rocks, a sign that the atmosphere could no longer sustain such rampant burning. And microscopic remains of ancient fungi preserved in amber trace their arrival to this very turning point in Earth's history. It is a humbling reminder that the greatest forces shaping the planet are not always mountains or oceans, but the smallest of organisms. The giants of the Carboniferous vanished, not just because of climate and continental shifts, but because of fungi too small for the naked eye creatures that rewrote the rules of decomposition. And so, the hyperoxic world closed like a door. The age of giant insects and millipedes had been a brief experiment, a singular chapter in Earth's long story. But the echoes of that age remain inside the coal seams we burn today, in the wings of dragonflies that still patrol ponds, and in the oxygen that fills our lungs. Yet the Carboniferous oxygen peak was not the only atmospheric revolution. To understand its place in Earth's history, we must zoom out to the billion-year saga of oxygen itself, and how its rise has shaped every chapter of life. Asterisk, the Carboniferous oxygen peak may seem like an anomaly, but it was only one act in a much longer drama. The story of how oxygen itself has waxed and waned across billions of years. To understand the giants of the swamps, we must see them in this greater context. For the first 2 billion years of Earth's history, there was almost no oxygen at all. The atmosphere was dominated by carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and methane. Life existed, but it was microbial anaerobic organisms that found oxygen not life-giving but poisonous then. Around 2.4 billion years ago came the first great revolution. Tiny cyanobacteria evolved the trick of photosynthesis, splitting water molecules with sunlight, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. Slowly, then suddenly, the atmosphere began to change. Oxygen reacted with dissolved iron in the oceans, creating vast deposits of rust-the-banded iron formations we still mine today. When those sinks were filled, oxygen spilled into the air. This great oxygenation event transformed the planet. For anaerobic life, it was a catastrophe. For future complexity, it was a foundation. For more than 1 billion years, oxygen remained modest, perhaps a few percent of the atmosphere. But around 800 million years ago, levels rose again in what scientists call the Neoproterozoic oxygenation event. Oxygen may have reached 10 to 15% of the air, just enough to power the first large, complex animals. Soon after came the Cambrian explosion, when life diversified into nearly every body plan we know today by the Devonian. Plants had colonized land, pumping out oxygen at unprecedented rates. Forests spread, and oxygen climbed higher still. This set the stage for the Carboniferous peak, 30 to 35%, the highest levels Earth has ever seen. For a geological moment, life breathed more deeply than it ever would again. But the story did not end there. After the Carboniferous collapse, oxygen fell sharply in the Permian, down to levels as low as 15%. Later, in the age of dinosaurs, it rose again, perhaps to 25 to 30% during the Cretaceous. Before settling to the 21% equilibrium we live in today, each rise opened doors for new evolutionary experiments. Each fall closed them, reshaping what kinds of life could thrive. The amphibians, reptiles, dinosaurs, birds, mammals all are chapters written in oxygen's ink. Seen from this perspective, the Carboniferous giants were not just freak accidents. They were the natural expression of a world flooded with oxygen. It's just as our own age with its mammals and birds is the expression of a different balance. And today, that balance is shifting again, not through fungi or tectonics, but through us. Human industry burns through ancient carbon, altering the atmosphere once more. Not in oxygen, but in carbon dioxide. Another experiment is unfolding, this time of our own making. For all its vast cosmic sweep, the saga of oxygen is written into our very blood. We are creatures of this gas. Every breath we take is a handshake with Earth's history, debt to the photosynthesizers that made our world habitable. Unlike insects, we do not rely on passive diffusion. Our lungs, with their millions of alveoli, draw oxygen deep into our bodies. Hemoglobin, the iron-bearing protein in our red blood cells, binds oxygen and ferries it to every organ. This system is active, efficient, and scalable. It allows us to fuel large bodies and ravenous brains. Without it, we could not exist. But this sophistication also reveals how fragile we are. Shift oxygen levels just slightly, and our bodies feel it at high altitudes, where the air thins. We grow dizzy, fatigued, even sick. Our blood must adapt by producing more red cells, straining to capture what little oxygen is available. Too little for too long, and we falter. On the other hand, too much oxygen is just as dangerous. In hyperoxic environments like the 35% air of the Carboniferous, our cells would be overwhelmed. Oxygen, so vital in small doses, becomes toxic when abundant. It produces reactive molecules that burn our tissues from within, leading to seizures, lung damage, or worse. Our physiology evolved for 21%, not 35%. This Goldilocks balance is the inheritance of Earth's long equilibrium. It shapes not only our biology, but our medicine. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy can heal by flooding tissues with oxygen under pressure. Divers know the terror of oxygen toxicity when the gas is breathed too deeply. Mountaineers, astronauts, and deep-sea explorers all live at the mercy of oxygen's limits. And beyond biology lies the philosophical truth. Oxygen is not a constant. It is a gift created and maintained by life itself. Without plants, algae, and cyanobacteria, the air would collapse back into an anoxic haze. We are not simply living on Earth, we are living with it. Sharing an atmosphere sustained by countless other organisms, the Carboniferous reminds us how dramatically this balance can change. If we were transported back, we would choke on abundance. If its oxygen-starved aftermath returned, we would gasp for air. Our existence is tied to a narrow atmospheric band, the product of 4 billion years of feedback between geology and life, and today. As we alter the air ourselves, not by oxygen, but by carbon dioxide, we are testing those feedbacks again. The question is not whether the Earth will adapt. It always has. The question is whether we will. Asterisk, the Carboniferous was a singular moment. In Earth's long history, a time when the air itself rewrote the rules of life, insects grew to monstrous sizes, forests turned into coal, and fires raged through landscapes where even damp wood could ignite. Endures all around us. The coal that powered our industrial age is the compressed memory of those ancient swamps. The dragonflies that dart above ponds carry the blueprint of aerial predators that once ruled skies heavy with oxygen. The very word Carboniferous means coal-bearing, a reminder that our modern civilization runs on the buried remains of that deep past. But there is a deeper lesson. The giants of the Carboniferous did not vanish because they were weak. They were perfectly adapted to their moment. When the atmosphere shifted, when fungi evolved to recycle wood, when forests fractured, that moment ended. Evolution moved on. We too live in a moment one defined, not by oxygen, but by carbon dioxide. We are reshaping the atmosphere with a speed no fungus or tectonic drift ever matched. The Carboniferous teaches us that atmospheres do not change without consequence. Life adapts, yes, but adaptation takes time. Time is the one resource we do not control. And yet, there is hope in the story as well. Life has always found a way forward. The fall of the arthropod giants opened the path for reptiles, for dinosaurs, for mammals, for us. Evolution is not about permanence. It is about resilience. It's about seizing the opportunities each new balance of air and earth provides. When we walk through a forest today, we are walking among survivors. Every fern, every insect, every bird carries within it the memory of worlds past. The Carboniferous is not gone. It lingers in the coal beneath our feet, in the genomes of living creatures, and in the very oxygen we breathe. We walk a quieter world now. The giants are gone. But if you look closely at the veined wings of a dragonfly, at the armored back of a millipede, at the fire-scorched stumps of a forest yew, can still glimpse their shadows. For a brief time, Earth was a different planet, and its story is still written in the air around us.